Good day, loyal followers. It is I, Honest Aaron, the completely unbiased and truthful, and today I will unveil your eyes to glimpse some of the manifold ways in which King Lear is a magnificent example for all you kings, queens, leaders, and mercenary captains. Firstly, Lear demonstrated unparalleled wisdom in dividing his kingdom and choosing worthy successors. Such splittings of realms and transfers of power always go smoothly. While Albany was a mediocre choice, Goneril, Regan, and Cornwall were excellent candidates, well trained in the habits of righteous rulers. Truly, Lear had a good eye for character. As his daughter Regan said, he hath ever but slenderly known himself, and if so for himself, how much more so for others. This decision was also wise because Lear courageously chose to abdicate both his throne and his responsibilities, leaving only the burdensome privileges of kingship for himself. He said it best that his intent was to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we unburdened crawl toward death. He later clarified that his daughters were to provide for him and his retinue, and to their husbands said, "We shall retain the name and all the addition to a king. The sway, revenue, execution of the rest, beloved sons, be yours." It's just as Relations 6:5 says, each one should make someone else carry his burden. His eldest daughter, Goneril, commented on this, calling her sagacious father, "idle old man that still would manage those authorities that he hath given away." Take note also of that famous passage on responsibility, Fluke 12:48, which states, "From everyone who's been given much, little more will be demanded, and from the one who's been trusted with much, little will be asked." If you need further convincing, here's what some other scholars had to say on the matter. Stephen Marks calls the abdication ceremony self-serving. Elisa Maninan claims that Lear fails to comprehend that relationships imply mutual responsibilities, even when one participant is the acknowledged superior of the other. And Eric De Haan says, "The abdication of his responsibilities in that brief scene are the beginnings of a virus that spreads rapidly throughout the entire royal household." What a wonderful indictment of old King Lear. As for advice, Lear had a good ear for counsel. He knew that honest advice is the bane of leaders, while flattery brings blessing to many. Kent himself told the king, "Kill thy physician, and the fee bestow upon the foul disease. Revoke thy gift, or, whilst I can vent clamour from my throat, I'll tell thee thou doest evil." No king would want to be told he's doing evil, so Lear sensibly exiled Kent for having the gall to suggest that he should reconsider his decision to disown Cordelia. After all, Kent also said, "Thinkest thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery bows? To plainness honour's bound when majesty falls to folly. How dare he accuse the venerable Lear of folly? He wouldn't be a king if he made wrong decisions, would he?" No, Lear listened to that which Cordelia calls that glib and oily art to speak and purpose not, primarily that of Goneril and Regan, who were more apt to learn their father's ways than Cordelia. Though she claimed their words were hollow, Cordelia must have been wrong about her sisters, for Lear told Goneril, "I have another daughter who, I am sure, is kind and comfortable," and he never specified that he had changed his mind on that score. King Lear listened to honest flattery, though he did err in tolerating the fool. How could one bearing such a name give the king good words? No, Lear heeded the teachings of Loverbs 1522. With counsel plans fail, but with few advisers they succeed, as well as Psalms 1:1. "Blessed is the man who walks in the counsel of the wicked, who stands in the way of sinners, who sits in the seat of scoffers." He was probably good friends with those quoted by Isaiah in chapter 30, verse 10. "They say to the seers, see no more visions, and to the prophets, give us no more visions of what is right. Tell us pleasant things, prophesy illusions," as well as those in 2 Timothy 4:3, who, to suit their own desires, gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. The strategy worked quite well, as Gwyneth Evans explains. Lear's willfulness and refusal to take good advice breaks his country into warring factions and leads to the violent death of most of the main players. How can any leader be a better that example? Furthermore, King Lear knew that good leaders should never restrain their emotions, for that would be to oppress themselves. One should let them rule. As the good book says, "Follow your heart, for certainly it is the place from which nothing wicked this way comes." the good king displayed healthy anger on several occasions. To Cordelia, for not buttering him up, he said, "Here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity, and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever," as well as, "Better thou hadst not been born than not to have pleased me better." To Kent, for daring to question him and calling his decision hideous rashness, he said, "Come not between the dragon and his wrath," and "Turn thy hated back upon our kingdom. If on the next day following thy banished trunk be found in our dominions, the moment is thy death." Of Goneril, after she defied his terms, he implored the heavens, "All the stored vengeances of heaven fall on her ungrateful top. Strike her young bones, you taking airs with lameness," and "You nimble lightnings, dart your blinding flames into her scornful eyes. Infect her beauty, you fen-sucked fogs drawn by the powerful sun, to fall and blast her pride." Lear's feats in the practice of that rare virtue, wrath, are too many to list. As Qualms 37:8 says, "Run to anger and hold on to wrath. Fret yourself, for it leads only to good." Proverbs 16:32 does say, "Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." But that must not apply to Lear. Lear also encouraged his knights to imitate his high standards of decorum and gentility, as any leader should. Goneril testified to this, saying, "His knights grow riotous, and other of your insolent retinue do hourly carp and quarrel, breaking forth in rank and not to be endured riots. And here do you keep 100 knights and squires, men so disordered, so debauched and bold, that this our court, infected with their manners, shows like a riotous inn. Epicurism and lust makes it more like a tavern or a brothel than a graced palace." A wonderful example of men learning from their king. True, we see precious few examples of Lear's knights, and Goneril may have occasionally exaggerated the truth slightly, and yes, Lear did claim, "My train are men of choice and rarest parts, that all particulars of duty know, and in the most exact regard support the worships of their name." Finally, King Lear's greatest leadership virtue was pride. It was most obvious when he instructed his daughters to compete in complimenting him, even though he had allotted their portions beforehand. A.C. Bradley concurs, saying that this scene is merely a childish scheme to gratify his love of absolute power and his hunger for assurances of devotion. Other examples include his petulant demands that others take care of him or bring him supper, and his firm conviction that no one else had better ideas than he did. Remember Romanians 12:3, which reads, "For by the grace given to me I tell everyone among you to think of himself more highly than he ought, to think with inebriated judgment, each according to the measure of pride that he is assigned." Tragically, Lear later went mad, ran off into a gale, consorted with low-born men, tolerated the advice of his fool, and started learning things like humility and repentance. If Lear hadn't possessed or found such unkingly qualities as that, he might have been a magnificent tyrant. As Gwyneth Evans said, that Lear is not altogether a tyrant is shown in his tolerance and fondness of the fool, which allows him to glimpse what he is not yet ready to acknowledge, that he himself has been a fool, gulled by his rapacious daughters. Instead, Lear went and apologized to his other daughter, Cordelia. What happened when he told Cordelia he was wrong to reject her? They were both killed. Obviously, Lear should have stuck to his guns, or bows as the case may be. Humble leaders die, but good leaders command their people to praise them, exile on a moment's notice, and give all hard and tedious work to others.
Now we will be talking about Goneril, Regan, Edmund, and Cornwall. All four of these characters share a power-hungry trait that leads them to having no morals and self-interest only, but they all gain their power in different ways. We will be sharing some more examples of bad leadership. Goneril and Regan win over their father by putting on an act and saying things they know their father wants to hear in order to gain his power and land. They gain their power through inheritance. Immediately, they lose all respect for their father by slowly taking away his servants, threatening punishment, and then eventually putting him out in a storm because they now have what they want. In Act 1, Scene 1, Goneril says about their father, "We must do something and should strike while the iron is hot." Already the sisters show terrible leadership qualities because they are so quick to dismiss people, even their own father. This disrespect turns into sisters throwing their morals out the window, like when they treat their father and the king with such disrespect, or when they imprisoned his messenger Kent, which is a huge sign of disrespect. Now they are throwing out simple courtesy laws. Not to mention when they torture Gloucester and are unfaithful to their husbands because they let all their new power get to their heads. This is all out of self-interest and wanting everything to themselves. The sisters may have worked together in the beginning, but they eventually end up killing each other over Edmund, but really because they wanted everything just for themselves. Though these two are an example of bad leadership, one can argue in defense of Conwell and Reagan. They sensed their father's insecurity and played on it. It is hard for followers to have respect for a leader who doesn't respect themselves. They truly thought they were going to be better leaders than Lear. Now, Shakespeare did something really interesting with the leadership roles of Conwell and Reagan versus the other men leaders in the play. Men and women are very different from each other when it comes to leadership. Several studies suggest that women are more feeling-oriented and less task-oriented than men, and also more communal to other people's feelings. It also has been proven that women exceed over men when it comes to the 4 different categories of leadership: idealized, inspirational, intellectual, and individualized. Idealized leaders set high goals and have high confidence in their followers. Inspirational leaders use emotional appeals to arouse their followers. Intellectual leaders question beliefs and challenge their followers to think differently. And finally, individualized leaders address all individual needs. Now, none of the leaders in this play would fit into any of these categories or characteristics. Traditionally, men are the more direct leaders and are seen as the authoritative, unemotional, and high-control leaders. Women are seen as more cooperative, collaborative, and supportive leader. You know, the stereotypical woman. Shakespeare makes it interesting by playing on these stereotypes and switching the roles, creating power-hungry women and weak-willed emotional men. It is tricky to extract leadership guidance from Shakespeare. We know that Edmund is Gloucester's bastard son and receives his power through betrayal. As an excellent schemer and manipulator, he fakes a letter to make it seem like his brother is planning to turn against their father because he longs for the love and power that Edgar receives and he does not. His hunger for power allows him to rebel against his family and the social order, and also determines which sister he wants to marry in the end based on who holds the most power. Also, now that it seems his brother is out of the way, he now disposes of his father by helping Cornwall torture and kill him. Edmund is an interesting villain, though, that almost makes the audience feel sympathy for him because he is treated so differently for being born out of wedlock. In Act 1, Scene 2, he questions the social order and blames the universe for him deciding to rebel. Edmund demands power and land, but more so wants to rise to power out of pure rebellion and to show how powerful he can be despite the social order. It seems like this could have had potential to turn to good leadership, like every good leadership movie, but his actions throughout the play show otherwise. We see a slight weakness in Edmund at the end of the play when he whispered in Act 5, Scene 3, despite everything, Edmund was beloved, and then commands to spare the life of Cordelia. This change of heart is rare among Shakespeare villains, and it makes the audience wonder if him being an evil leader is just misdirected desire for that familial love. Cornwall is not much of a main character, but he is just as power-hungry and shares the same evil leadership qualities. Right away, he gains his power by marrying Reagan. When Kent acts as a messenger and is disgracefully locked up, Cornwall is quick to volunteer to accept blame, showing us that he knows he has more power than Lear and isn't afraid to show him that. We then see his true characteristics when he decides to torture and kill Gloucester for helping King Lear. He loves violence just for the sake of violence. The top 5 qualities of bad leadership are poor integrity, lack of adaptability, little vision for future, lack of accountability, and poor communication skills. None of these sound familiar, do they? All 4 of the characters became leaders in different ways. Through inheritance, through betrayal, and lastly, through marriage. However, acceptance of authority has a lot to do with just the selection of the leader. Authority includes the perceived right of the person in one position to influence the other's behavior. They may not have had the qualities of good leadership, but they were able to secure authority and influence those around them. Therefore, they would be considered negative leaders or bosses using an autocratic leadership. This means that they emphasize punishment and base their leadership off their opinion only. It leads to quick decisions and aggression.
In King Lear, most of the people in leadership positions are very bad leaders. Good leadership is only found in the most unexpected places. In an interview about leadership, Captain Sierra Usher of the U.S. Army Reserve said that good leaders and good followers share many of the same attributes. She specifically mentioned loyalty, duty, integrity, and personal courage. Here's what these values look like in the play. Shakespeare sees loyalty, both to family and to the leader, as crucial. Most important is loyalty to the king, a trait almost universal among the play's good characters. Duty involves the willingness to condemn evil and call out a leader's faults, even at the risk of one's life. Shakespeare seems to say that calling out a leader's grave mistake is an act of loyalty. Integrity involves strong moral values, especially honesty and humane treatment of others. And courage is when a leader is willing to risk their life or livelihood in order to do what's right. Gloucester seems to have some of these good qualities. When it becomes clear that Regan and Cornwall are Lear's enemies, Gloucester proves himself loyal to the king. He also tries to keep the Duke from putting Kent in the stocks. But he's too easily deceived. He doesn't have enough evidence that his son is plotting against him to warrant his scathing death threats, but at least he repents with the same emotional force once he realizes he's wrong. Kent is loyal to the king, even when the king is making poor decisions. Kent is willing to risk his life to call the king out for a wrong decision, although he could have done it a bit more tactfully. Kent also shows his loyalty and humility by disguising himself and returning to serve the king, despite the king's threats to execute him. But Kent isn't as good of a leader as he might seem at first. While in disguise, he abuses Oswald to gain the king's favor. Later on, he picks a fight with Oswald by being a horrible jerk, gets put in the stocks for it, and then lies to the king claiming he was wronged, all to make himself look like a martyr to the king's cause. He abandons moral principles by abusing others and lying, just to gain the king's favor using false appearances. In doing so, he becomes a kind of flatterer himself. Cordelia is a saintly character. She despises flattery and, unlike Kent, doesn't resort to it herself. Her love and grief seem genuine, not just for show. She also speaks kindly to her father and sisters even after they reject her. As she says goodbye, she wishes them well and hesitates to call out their faults directly, although previous dialogue shows she's by no means in denial of those faults. And unlike her sisters, she proves her love to the king. Toward the end of the play, she actively seeks out and rescues him. Although the Duke of Albany is pretty oblivious at the beginning of the play, this is mostly because no one tells him about their evil plans. He's also a peacemaker who tries to calm people down and reason with them, such as his wife and the king. Although Albany finds himself on battle lines opposite the king, he hesitates to go to war. When Lear and Cordelia are captured, he tries to show them mercy. He also shows moral integrity when he criticizes his wife for treating the king horribly. While this seems to show a lack of familial affection, he's one of the few good figures in power, so it's significant that he's willing to call out evil for what it is. At the end of the play, he manages things fairly well as the only person of power left alive. But most importantly, he demonstrates humility by trying to give his power back to the king. As Denny Gunderson says in The Leadership Paradox, the human obsession for control and the sincere desire of a true leader to serve are mutually exclusive. By the end of the play, the Duke of Albany clearly falls into the second category. Although Edgar falls for his brother's deception, he does so because of his familial loyalty to Edmund. He shows both resourcefulness and humility in disguising himself as a madman. And, even after being wrongfully rejected, he shows deep loyalty and love for his father, leading and caring for him until his death. Edgar also stands up and puts his life on the line to denounce his brother's evil deeds. But once his brother confesses, Edgar forgives him, and his forgiveness almost saves Cordelia. And last but not least, we cannot forget the hero known only as Servant 1. He has the courage to stand up for Gloucester and for what is right, regardless of the cost to himself. And he even seems to do it out of loyalty to his master. In the book A Higher Standard of Leadership, Keshavan Nair tells how Gandhi led through courageous acts. He defines moral courage as doing what is right and accepting the consequences. Cornwall's servant is a hero and a leader because he possesses this moral courage. And although he dies, he ends up being responsible for the death of Cornwall, one of the nastiest scumbags in the play. If he hadn't done this, the end of the play might have been downright depressing. Ultimately, leadership skill is not determined by position and authority. It is determined by many factors, such as skill and experience, but good leadership that has good effects on the larger world stems from good character, loyalty, duty, integrity, and courage. Ironically, it's the least powerful characters in the play who display these characteristics, which just might explain why almost everybody dies in the end.